First of all, I am not here today as the representative of AAIS as much as I'm here as the chair of the new Regulatory Reporting Steering Committee for the openIDL project at the Linux Foundation. Just want to make sure that we kind of open this the right way, since this technically is a Linux openIDL project meeting that we have to do and follow the protocols that are consistent with the Linux Foundation and how they operate all of their projects. You know, long and the short, here's the antitrust policy, don't violate it, and if you do, somebody will stop you. The reason this is important and reason this needs to continue over in the Linux Foundation is that they are the largest open source software consortium in the world, right? And this is going to be bigger than AAIS and data reporting, which we started with. But that needs the ability to grow this, and also the ability for it to be used without tying itself up into proprietary knots is very important. So this place is where this can evolve. It has a governance structure that will allow participation. We're very hopeful that we will have the kind of one of the first environments where we have collaboration between the regulatory community and the insurance industry to come together to create some great architecture and move forward, and then have some of this stuff flow back out to address some of the things that we've seen come up, even at this meeting, around cybersecurity, around the charges that are at the committee levels, around privacy, about how we deal with these things, who owns data. A lot of those questions can be answered or can at least be addressed with this type of a platform. So this is the collaborative space that we feel like that the community and network can come together, and that it can progress, and we can give some of these results back to our industry, to the NAIC, to the states, to the regulators to be able to implement. openIDL, an open blockchain network for the insurance industry. Part of what we want to make sure you understand with this is that it's not just about building the technology platform. That's kind of the easy part. The part that's more difficult is around governance, and around moving the community together underneath that governance. And that's really driven the work we're looking at right now. So we have this technology, we have built the platform, it has been donated into the open source community in the openIDL project. Many of you, when you have technical staff working on these types of projects, that's all going to be in a GitHub repository for you. And the structure that we have initially around the openIDL project at the Linux Foundation is a governing board. The governing board consists right now of the representatives from the Travelers, the Hartford, Hanover, and us at AAIS. And we're very, very excited today. What I consider to be one of our first members of our Regulatory Reporting Steering Committee is here, Kim Brown from the Hanover. Thank you so much for coming. They have been incredible supporters of the project, and of the moving forward as in a collaborative space. So we really appreciate that. Okay, so moving kind of into that, what do we do now, right? We have this platform, we have this place at the Linux Foundation. We're moving toward now the Regulatory Reporting Steering Committee, which is the inaugural invitation event here. We hope to have we will have 10 voting members that have been, this structure's been approved by the governing board, 5 regulatory representatives and 5 company representatives approved by the board. Basically, there's a couple of things that we really need to be able to work toward in the steering committee. Truman Esmond is the representative, or is the chair of the technical steering committee. So all of that information and things that keep building the platform itself will happen over in the tech steering committee. All the things that help to drive this forward from a regulatory reporting perspective will happen here in the regulatory reporting steering committee. And basically we have some charges here. We have a draft charter that will be addressed and adopted once we have a full committee seated. But basically the 3 key points will be around evolving the network to the next generation of the regulatory reporting. We've had some discussion where I have some folks that are looking at the stat reporting handbook. We have folks who have, that work in this every day. Right now, we know a couple of things about the reporting. When you get it as a regulator, it tends to be dated information. The aggregation makes it hard for us to move it through in a really timely way. And we know that data reporting or data calls get generated very frequently because that data is not enough and in time enough for you as a regulator to be able to address a lot of the situations or things that are happening in your constituency, in your industry, in your areas. So, this is where we will try to mature that. How do we approach that? How do we look at building things that we can then pass over to the NAIC and some of the committees that are structured there to give them guidance, to give them a better understanding. NAIC is a great example of a collaboration of the states, right? You guys work fantastic together through this mechanism. One of the things, though, that we see is, and you are great at getting industry input, but when you go to build technology products, and when you're looking at how do we deal with data, you really need the input of the companies of who's going to actually be pulling this data and how they're going to be responsible for it. So a collaborative environment like this really will better facilitate that kind of information flowing to you in a much better way. So this is a little confusing, and I'm going to try to get through this really quickly because otherwise we'll talk about the platform all day, and we want to talk about the report and what we did with proof of concept. But basically, you do have to kind of a little bit understand the technology, the platform, to kind of understand how the actual cycle of a data call would work in this platform. But basically, as you see, there's all of these nodes here represent a carrier in the blockchain world, okay? And all of the information, all this data that they have is going to be living over in their node, right? It's private data behind their firewall, protected. You don't need to have the raw data for this to work. Right now, we spend a lot of time sending big piles of data to somebody that aggregates it, and then maybe you get a big pile of data, and then people do stuff with it, and analytics come out, and it's taken a long time, and it's hard. But as we look at this, and as a company, imagine, we don't have it diagrammed here, but the policy admin system, the accounting system, the other operational systems inside of an insurance company can feed this node. All right, and what will be important as we move forward too, as it feeds this node, it will be dependent upon that information going in a certain format. And that's our data standards, which we will talk about as well in the regulatory steering committee, is making sure we approve good standards or we pass on good data standards to continue and develop these nodes. But it's their map, right? It's a roadmap, how that data goes into these nodes, and it becomes very important to talk about. And once it's in this node, basically there's a fingerprint or a hash in blockchain tech speak. There's a hash that's created that identifies that data, right? So it makes it impossible to change or to manipulate, because you've actually identified the data such to the point that it's immutably recorded on that blockchain ledger going forward. So you have some ability now to kind of that freeze frame, right, of what was actually being used to generate some of the reports coming out. So as I was speaking, so that's that module has something called a harmonized data store in that node. And that's where the configuration or the data models that we use, how we put data into that becomes important, right? So part of the Regulatory Reporting Steering Committee will be trying to address what makes sense, right? Now, AAIS did develop 2 of these data models, basically the beginning of those, the 2 data models, one for the auto and one for homeowners data. And what we did is we went out and we basically went through all the regs, all the statutes, every place we could find where there was a independent data call issued by a state around market conduct activities. And we looked at how do we take the data elements that were requested there, how do we take the data elements we have in our stat plans, how do we take the data elements that are in other stat plans, and how do we logically put that together. We used and built that off a model called the IIW, which is an IBM product. It's about 40 some odd years of development around modeling, and we were able to say, hey, can we use this as a kind of a roadmap to build that data model for the standards, and we're going to publish those in the open source. And they thought about it for a little while, and they said, well, that kind of makes sense, so you can go ahead and do that. So right now we have those two data standard models, and they will be put into the open source community as well, right? And that'll be something that we'll need to be talking about as a regulatory reporting steering committee is, did we capture everything? Are there more things needed? How do we amend those in the future? How do we give those to the NAIC, to the regulators, so that they can look at making sure that we have a data standard that's acceptable to everyone. Okay, so you're going to hear about, in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about the proof of concept that we did. And again, you'll have that report hopefully in your inboxes. But I'm going to step back now and kind of go forward and talk you through how it kind of happened. AAIS set up a third multi-tenant node where we took stat data and other data from other carriers and created a third repository there. And the reason we did that, one, was to broaden the scope and to basically de-identify the two participating carriers. So all the results that you see, I have demonstration on it for a reason. But we also added that element of putting in data represented in that third node that was not real, right? Or it was real to a certain extent, and then had some decoration that would help obfuscate the carrier data. We want to make sure that that gets protected in the process. So basically, the carrier consents to the data call. That you guys have seen the screens of that before. So the extraction pattern, which is another one of those buzzwords we use here in the blockchain community, is interchangeably used a lot of times. What you hear or have heard called smart contract, and that extraction pattern is basically retrieved from the ledger. The ledger's out here, and that node says, "Oh, I see that there's a nice little request out there. Let me go see if I want to participate in that." And they say yes. And then that extraction pattern or smart contract executes in the node, right? It's run against that data that's been identified and placed in that harmonized data store according to the standard. It runs against that, okay? Then what we do is, and this is where it kind of starts to get interesting, is that we took a third-party data set, okay? In this situation, we took the payroll protection loan data that the federal government collected, and we said, okay, this is really interesting. We need to understand how we can make a connection from your data that's here in your harmonized data store to other data sources. And we said, we went through a lot of different ways to do that, right? A lot of different elements we thought would work. We finally got to address level or address data. Can you put in your address of your policyholder to connect it to the policy information and to the claim information that you have submitted? And they said, okay, we think we can. And they did, and they were able to do that inside of their nodes. So when we ran that extraction pattern with the payroll protection information, it was able to match up against the policyholder address to the loan information address. Well, what does that give us? It's pretty interesting to know that we can now take external data sources and actually connect it to the consumer, right? That policyholder level. So the extraction pattern, then is placed in what we call a private data store. This private data collection is part of the Hyperledger fabric that becomes really important to us because it allows us to move data off chain. So all of the answers to whether or not there was a match between this address and this loan address, and the result of yes, there was, and what that meant from the policyholder information to connecting it to that loan, that goes into the private data collection. Now, again, no address level data from the company ever left their node, nor will it ever leave their node. So there's some very private data that never goes anywhere, still inside that harmonized data store, but the insight from what that meant from an address level information can be shared. And so that's on that private data collection and moves off chain and moves into an analytics node. Now, right now, AAIS held the analytics node, right? One day it might not be us, probably won't be us. And some of this information on this private data collection can flow to the analytics node. There's some interesting things though about that. And why this is special is that all of those activities, every time something moved from one place to the other or interacted in any sort of way, a hash was created. It was written to the ledger. So you can always recreate it. You can look backwards, right, in the chain and see what happened. And you can know that every time you'll get, you may run this query yet again one day. And the beauty of this is that if that information has then changed inside of that harmonized data store, and why would that change? Why would that be different? What if you had a consumer that said, I don't want to be in your harmonized data store anymore. I want to be de-identified by you. I don't want you to know who I am. Well, when that repopulates, there'll be something that says somebody's gone, but we can still regenerate from the extraction. We can still see how that was affected, how somebody leaving was affected, but not who. But we can see that as it happens on the chain, right? So you've got this immutable ledger that keeps writing, totally audible. You can look back, you can understand the exact interactions that happened with this data. Some of the other things that's interesting about this going into an analytics node is it can go away. So when an insurer shares information with a third party, say an insurance broker or someone else in the insurance ecosystem, and they still have to give some data, right, off chain, more anonymized type of data that's in that private data collection there, not the address or anything like, but say they're sharing some insight with a third party, they can make that go away and they can understand every time anybody used that analytics node to produce anything, and they can blow it up. So that's a way to pull your data back that you never had before. All right, so this is the life cycle, and you'll see this in the paper that we presented. And this is exactly what we did. Is we had this data call, and we put us in the middle of this for the time being as a stat reporter, as a collector, anonymizer of data in our industry, and executed this extraction pattern on this carrier's node, right? So a result comes out, we're attaching this payroll protection loan data to kind of give it that perspective, right? And the perspective, not the data, flows back out into that analytics node, and we're able to do some things with it. Some really big ideas here, because it's really kind of the first time we've been able to do that. Many times regulators ask for data, and there's always a concern about the proprietary data elements from an insurance company, like address level, right? It's just that they don't want to give you that. We understand that, and we have to work around, right? We have to make our picture a lot bigger and fuzzier to make sure that we aren't compromising private data, and when we're asking questions. This is the first time we've ever been able to actually take that street address and policy claim relationship and be able to give insights out of that from a third-party data source, right? We actually can chain. We know that these things happen sequentially. You know, the biggest goal achieved here, identifying data, that address level data is kept confidential. It's private. But we are able to leverage it, and you know, basically we've proven that this technology can work for unlocking a lot of information, a lot of insight to us that we may not had ever had before. You know, as you can see, we did some of the normal. You know, the NAIC did a very good job of getting that macro picture around number of policies and the impacts for the policy content. So we just refined that a little bit and focused in on the BOP policies that were involved. But this is very much like the information you saw from the NAIC data call, which is great, right? They do good work. What makes this a little bit different and what we can look for is the efficiency in running this. Once a company repeatedly puts information in that harmonized data store, it means that you can hit that database as often as you want. Our goal is to get companies to have those nodes repopulated once a month. But we're pretty confident that within the first couple of life cycles of doing this, we can get monthly data. Okay. Now, one day we will get daily. We can work our way back down to real-time data, but you got to start somewhere, right? Right now, monthly data sounds really good to folks who wait sometimes 18 months to get a report. Now, what happened too in this call, because we were able to go in and bounce against a database that had some interesting things in it. For example, to get a payroll protection loan, you had to self-report of how many employees were affected that were under that loan, right? So you start to get an understanding and an idea about the number of employees impacted. Well, when I can marry my policyholder data to my data that is from this payroll protection, I can actually know then my policyholder employees without getting that information necessarily from the insurance company. Or sometimes that data is down in underwriting systems or with MGAs or with other people they can't even get to, and that's why it's so hard to produce for data calls, very far removed. In fact, one of the proof of concepts we have going right now with a very large insurer, data for one data call in one state took 89 transformations before it makes it to a place that they could actually report. Now that's a lot of people and time and exercises of touching data to get it to a reportable fashion. What's even more concerning is probably the companies that don't have the sophistication to be able to do that. So you probably get a lot of blank reporting fields because it's just nearly impossible to do. But in this report, we were able to go back and look at the perspectives that came from the payroll protection data and start to backfill some of that. The other thing that was very difficult to tell, and I think there was a lot of debate on how you categorize what type of what industry they were in, who was this affecting, right? Again, by backing into that with the payroll protection data and connecting that, you can start to see the different sectors that were actually major appointed. So we tried to do this for the for the states that were participating in the data call, in the COVID-19 BI data call with us. You start to see, and you start to get more data around what industries were affected, right? And again, we've connected it back to that policyholder information, so there's the direct correlation. What's new to this is that usually we have to do that from a much higher level, and you don't get the trust or the ability to trust that the data was a match, right? You have to make some assumptions, very big assumptions sometimes around that. There's things you just know intuitively. One of them was that we did not, even in the very early stages, we did not think that premium and premium paid on a yearly basis would even touch what the overall exposure and whatever the losses would be. And this is a very limited kind of representation of that. And again, it for demonstration purposes only, but it starts to tell a story about, even if you included all of the commercial premium from every policy sold in the United States, by these carriers and then our extra information, it would just not even barely touch the amount of the magnitude of the payroll protection loans, of the money that was actually paid. This was just AAIS trying to give you some illustration about the power of being able to connect these things at the end. Our first use case obviously is around data reporting. At the end of the report, there's probably very much more interesting things you as regulators and folks and data scientists and actuaries would come up with to look at in terms of what this matching data could give us. But what we do know is now the technology does work. It is possible. We solved data privacy once. Come help me solve data privacy for this more times. We want to change the dynamic of how we do this in our industry. It will take a collaboration between the parties here to make that happen. I can't build and you can't build a network strategy unless you have the network come together to do that. So this is where we do that. This is important because I understand how hard that is from a regulatory perspective as a former regulator to say, I'm going to join something and we're going to work collaboratively with the insurance companies to get there. But it's the right thing to do. It's the right way to do it. The reason we have assurances that we will have, have a framework for this is that existence of this being in the Linux Foundation. They know how to do open source collaboration, right? They have this nailed. They understand the governance and understand what's needed to be governance for a platform, for software, for the community. The important part is, though, we do need to start moving toward membership. We have three large insurers, actually 4 large insurers that are participating right now. We have a few more that are kicking the tires and proofs of concepts for internally for what they're doing. Everyone's starting to see the merit of what we're doing here. And so we really asked, and we had great participation from the regulatory community in the design thinking. So I really ask that you go ahead and please sign up, help volunteer. Let me know you want to be on the regulatory reporting steering committee. There'll be other working groups that will probably form under us to run proofs of concepts, to work on the data standards. And that information will then hopefully be able to support all of the great activities that are happening here at the NAIC. Obviously, you can contact me, Truman, Lori. Our emails and probably all our personally identifiable information is out there somewhere. Please go to the openIDL.org at the Linux Foundation. All this will be posted there as well. Please sign up. You can go ahead and sign up as a steering committee on the mailing list so you can start to see and get all of this information. Thank you all so very much, and you have a great rest of the afternoon and safe travels back home.